Y'all mad at Omarion for eating watermelon? Don't be. Black Americans descending from enslaved people in the U.S. are accustomed to understanding how the whip, the judicial system, the voting ballot, and noose were weaponized by white Southerners and Northerners to dehumanize and deprive us of our citizenship. But just as lethal were the racist cultural tropes. One in particular, Black Americans eating watermelon. A seemingly harmless fruit was socially engineered by white Southerners to shape a negative view of Black Americans. Through its color, shape, juicy texture, black seeds, and sweet flavor, watermelon became a tool to assassinate Black appetites and Black character. The stereotype implied that Black Americans' weakness for watermelon was pathological, brutish in nature, to the point of stealing, fighting over, and only wanting to sit around all day just eating it. The trope is intrinsic to Black American culture, becoming so pervasive that we still carry that pain from the violence with us today, as evidenced by the Black community's outrage over Omarion entertaining the crowd by eating watermelon during his Live Versus performance last week. Yes, he used it as a prop, and yes, he sexualized it. But for as much as watermelon was and still is a symbol of racism, it was also a symbol of liberation for Black American descendants of enslaved people. Watermelon has always been part of Black culture, originating from Africa, the Kalahari Desert, and other regions. Scenes of watermelon being harvested were depicted in hieroglyphics on the walls of ancient buildings in Egypt. It made its way to American shores via Africans who were enslaved. We must not forget how very important watermelon was to the Black community during slavery and to newly emancipated Black people who grew, ate, and sold watermelon, and in doing so, made the fruit a symbol of both their resistance to enslavement and a tool to assert their freedom. Because, you see, watermelon was one of the only things they were allowed to own, sell, and reap the direct fruits of their labor. That's why we love watermelon. And that's why it's always present on the table at Black family gatherings. Let's not forget how nutritional watermelon is. It's also possible that enslaved people used the profits from the sale of their watermelon crop to purchase not only their freedom, but other family members. Shaming and policing Black bodies with and around watermelon as the butt of a national joke emerged between the mid to late 1800s. Black people replaced the Irish as the principal grotesque comic caricature, first in print and then in recorded tunes, just as vaudeville and minstrels were developing to entertain wealthy white audiences. American newspapers and films helped to amplify the association of Black caricatures eating watermelon. In newspapers, they printed predictable tales about Black fruit thieves who were met by armed plantation owners. And in films, they used exaggerated, grotesque images and characteristics of Black people. The racist watermelon trope gained popularity during the early 1900s and prevailed through Reconstruction. It appeared to be a response to, 1, Black watermelon merchants entering the market economy as entrepreneurs, selling watermelon in public squares and pocketing the money for themselves. White Southerners appeared angry that the nation's former enslaved laborers became sellers and consumers after building a nation in bondage. In their mind, Black people were flaunting their newly found freedom. It also was a response to create propaganda to alienate and undermine the authority, power, and significance of newly elected Black politicians. It created the idea that black people were incapable of being good citizens or public officials. These stereotypes also reinforced a national ideology that Reconstruction had been a mistake and that white domination ought to continue because black people were simpletons needing to be controlled. We know none of this was true. The trope has created anxiety for many black people, although we know there is nothing intrinsically racist about watermelon or even eating watermelon. However, sometime during our upbringing, black people have learned that there is an unspoken rule that watermelon is to never be eaten in front of white people, especially colleagues. This is what Toni Morrison once observed as, quote, racism's lethal cling, end quote. How do we disentangle ourselves from the violence and the trauma associating us with eating watermelon? My suggestion is to remember that after emancipation, black people were systematically disenfranchised, excluded from the economy, and were starving. One way they were able to sustain themselves was by growing, eating, and selling watermelon.